All right, guys, so this is going to be a quick Unleash video, but I want to talk a little bit about plasticity and using other software in your workflow when creating game assets. Now, I've seen this in the comments quite a bit. People are asking for plasticity tutorials, or they're saying, why are you still modeling in Blender when you could be modeling in plasticity? Now, the truth is, when I look at this software, I think of this as like an extension of modeling from inside of Blender, not necessarily as its own dedicated modeling tool in that respect, because it's limited in some ways on how you can actually work with this, and it doesn't do everything that you needed to do. Now, it's not to knock the software at all, because it's a fantastic 3D modeler, but it's a NURBS-based or CAD-based 3D modeling software. If you've never seen this before, basically you can create more or less like shapes, turn them into solids, and extrude them out, and then start working them out from there. So very easy to use, very fast and efficient. But it's something that's going to take a little bit of time to get used to working with. And the problem is as you create 3D models over here, if you're trying to turn them into game assets, a lot of times there's a process of going through with them and working them out into high polys and into low poly models. So that way you can actually use it as a game asset. Now, it's not a very difficult process once you understand the basics of modeling, but you learn that kind of stuff in software like Max, Maya, or Blender, not in plasticity necessarily. So there's some pros to working over here. It's easier, it's faster, but it's more limited in some respects. You don't have the ability to use things like, you can't set up like UV maps, you can't do rigging, you can't do animation, you can't use geonodes, all those fun things. It just doesn't happen. It's a very destructive modeler. It doesn't have the ability to do non-destructive modeling, which you can actually do inside of Blender and things like 3D Studio as well. So, or partially non-destructive at least. And so while it's very efficient and fast to work out these CAD models, you can make them very complex too. It's not always the best option necessarily, especially when you're learning. That's what I'm trying to get to anyways. Because you can see, like, we could just, create a solid and do a Boolean and fillet the edges. It's very easy. And then we keep doing that process and we end up with our 3D object at the end of it. But when you take that 3D object and eventually you export it, you actually export out two different versions. You export out a high poly version, and then you're going to export out a lower poly version that you're going to end up using as your game mesh. But the problem with those lower poly exports is oftentimes they need to be fixed up and cleaned up. You can see here, these edges are not lining up with each other and they're not matching. So you're going to do a lot of basically going around cleaning up this model, trying to get it all to work out just right, and then it eventually will be usable. Not the hardest thing to do when you understand poly modeling, but you're definitely going to have to go through that process, and it is part of incorporating this software into your workflow, right? You're going to go through this step at some point, and you're going to export out the high poly. More than likely, you're going to take that to ZBrush. You're going to do something like Z-remesh it, and then sculpt on it a little bit, perhaps. All this other stuff that you might end up having to do over there, right? So you're going to learn more things. And there comes a certain point or time when you're working in 3D where you get tired of using more and more software. It really gets annoying after a little while. It becomes more shortcuts, more hotkeys, more things to remember, more steps. And it's very overwhelming, especially if you're just getting into 3D modeling. So, learning the basics in Blender, like creating a standard model using the standard modeling tools, knife cuts, insets, bevels, extrusions, all that fun stuff. Super useful to start understanding that, working with the polygons, the topology, the triangles, the edges, all that. Eventually you can add on to this and go outside of Blender at some point. So then you can use specialized tools, whether it's something like plasticity, or maybe you want to learn ZBrush, or you want to learn something like Mari or something else, right? Like there's all kinds of different tools out there. Maybe you're doing a lot of clothing, you want to learn to use Marvelous Designer, you could do that too. And then on top of that, there's even other types of software like Substance 3D Modeler. And, this is a voxel-based system for the most part, but it also has, surprisingly, it has an SDF modeler in it now, which was added almost a year ago now. But the main thing is that, SDF is, kind of like a voxel system. Well, it's not voxels. There's two different types of SDF. There's the sign distance functions and sign distance fields. So like clay systems, voxel systems, sign distance field, sign distance function is going to be this SDF. So SDF is like a broad term, I guess. But the main thing is that, like, if we're going to create those kinds of shapes that we were just doing over there in plasticity, we can do similar type things over here, but there's limitations to it, right? So like, yeah, we can create this shape and we can just duplicate it. We can scale it and we can turn it into a subtraction We can do a lot of similar like things here and add a little bit of blend to it maybe. And you get a similar result, but it's a little bit softer perhaps. So ultimately, what I find is that plasticity is great if you want to go through that process and use it in your workflow. You can do that. It's really great for concept design, where you don't want to worry about topology. You're just more worried about creating cool designs. Same with Substance 3D Modeler. You just want to sculpt and create cool stuff, or use the SDF modeler. Go for it. You can do that. But they're kind of extensions. They're not the core. They're not the foundation, right? And until you learn the foundations of 3D, this stuff is just extra stuff to learn that you don't really necessarily need right off the bat, okay? So in Blender, you know, we work with the tools that we have here, but the add-ons really make this an even better software. And I have to mention this because like Maya and Max, they both have default tools that Blender simply does not have, right? That make them, they work out in just little minor tools that make it work out much better in my opinion. But the main thing is that they're going to have them and Blender doesn't. And the add-ons are kind of filling in the gap because the Blender devs haven't added it for whatever reason. Don't ask me why. But the main thing is that, you know, you got like Bull Tools, Box Cutter, Hard Ops. You got all these add-ons you got to learn and remember too, right? And so this all starts to add up and it gets very overwhelming for the beginners out there. You see like just a right click kind of messed that up. But anyways, the main idea is that you're going to go through this process of learning all these things, but the standard, like the core of poly modeling is the standard for creating game assets. You have to know this. There's no way to cheat that system. And for whatever reason, I'm getting like order issues out of Box Cutter recently. So this mirror goes down. It fixes that issue. It's kind of weird. And then, yeah, if something has a software issue or whatever, that can throw you for a loop as a beginner as well. So you wouldn't know it because you're just getting started. But nonetheless, when you're doing Boolean N-gon modeling in Blender, a lot of guys are starting with this. The one thing they really mess up is they don't line up their edges and they don't count their bevels as well. So it's very easy to get into something like this and then start using the wrong counts on your topology and not lining them up maybe as well as they should be. So this is a very particular thing that you need to be able to do so you have a much easier time cleaning this up, right? You're still going to, like if you did CAD, you're still going to have to clean the model up, potentially. And it comes in with custom normals. So if you look, clear custom normals, these edges don't line up with each other quite right. This is going to create a lot of triangulation in these areas where the shading will go to heck. Custom normals fixes that issue, but once you start modifying this mesh, you lose your custom normals a lot of times. You got to restart them over kind of. So something like this, you know, you're already starting at a better starting point basically. And you're lining up those edges now. So later on, we'll have a much easier time merging these together. Matter of fact, even with a modifier, you know, we could do like a weld modifier, maybe tweak it a bit. You can see we can actually merge them right now. And what that would eventually allow us to do is if we had maybe them a little bit better, like so, we might be able to add another bevel modifier. So that's the thing about working in Blender. If you're very particular with what you're doing, you can do a lot of things non-destructively and just make overall great meshes, but it's not as simple and straightforward perhaps as doing models in Plasticity. So there are some pros to it. There's also some cons. And that's the case with every software. There's pros and there's cons. And if you're just getting started in all this and you're worried about ZBrush and Plasticity and every other tool underneath the sun, you're going to have a hard time just focusing on what matters most. At the end of the day, like if you're a 3D generalist and you're working on an indie game project, you're probably going to be responsible for creating a vast majority of the 3D models in the game, including rigging and animation. So what ends up happening is that you're going to be doing characters and weapons and props and environments, and you need to be able to create these models fast and efficient. And not just fast and efficient, as fast and efficient as you possibly can, where you get into the quality results that you want. So for me anyways, when I look at modeling in Blender, I see it as the full package, like, because I can do UV unwrapping over here. I can do rigging and I can sculpt. I can do whatever I want really for the most part, right? It's all here. And with the add-ons, like, you know, text tools add-on, UV toolkit, pack master, textile density checker, the modifier list add-on, hard ops, box cutter, machine tools, mesh machine. That's a lot of extra stuff to learn that doesn't come packed with Blender vanilla, but it increases the productivity of Blender to such a high degree. I really don't have any problems working over here and getting things done. And using something like Plasticity, while it's great, I'd rather get things kind of more correct off the start by doing stuff like this, working with them in a non-destructive manner to some degree, and getting them going basically to do what I want them to do. And in order to really master this, you have to spend a lot of time in Blender alone. Like, so there's not much of a benefit for an indie game artist to really just, like, you can use Plasticity, don't get me wrong, but there's not a huge benefit to it, right? It's very good for concept design perhaps. And, but so is Blender. I mean, you can use Blender for concept design and you have access to GeoNodes. But then, you know, Substance Modeler, also another great one for concept design, but it gives you a voxel mesh at the end of the day. Maybe not the most efficient because now we got to create a low poly to go along with it. Plasticity, we got to optimize a low poly. But at the end of the day, it's a judgment call on what you're going to pick up and use and incorporate into your pipeline. These are not the things I would probably incorporate. So I think they're limiting your flexibility to some degree. That's not to say that they aren't good tools or software or whatever the case. They certainly are. They're totally worth their the money that Plasticity costs is very cheap, right? So, but the main thing here is that I don't need it, right? It's just extra stuff, and I don't necessarily need to spend time learning that when I could spend more time, you know, just working on things at this point. So, and something like this, even like Quad Remesher is an add-on. Yes, it's expensive for Blender, but Quad Remesher is great because if you don't have ZBrush and you're trying to do any kind of sculpting over here, you can half the time quad remesh something and just sculpt on it. So you don't get perfect edge flows and anything like that. But I mean, literally, you just click the button, boom, you might have a quad remesh that works out. So let me type in a different value here though, and try that again, just to give you an idea. So this is kind of what you would do in ZBrush with a high poly export from Plasticity anyways. But what you're seeing now is that it does in fact quad remesh, and decently well. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but we can definitely tweak it, modify it if we wanted to make it a little bit better perhaps. So it's always a possibility to go back and use a high density mesh like this and just start working it out and turning it into exactly what you want it to be, right? So I can kind of redefine the screen area there perhaps. Now you don't always get so lucky with the edge flows with this add-on. There are ways to control the edge flow a little bit, and there's, you know, different types of ways of prepping the mesh before you run it through Quad Remesh. There's different settings here to use. But to get a quick subdividable high poly mesh, it does work out quite well. Even if it throws some errors into the topology, usually you can fix those fairly easily. Some more so than others, but the main thing is that, you know, you can spend a lot of time playing with other software, whether it's Plasticity, Substance 3D Modeler, or ZBrush, and I highly recommend learning ZBrush too, because it's one of the few that fundamentally work different than a lot of the other ones. Like it's a complete package type deal, and it handles polygons like crazy. So, which you don't really get in Blender sculpting. So ZBrush is its own territory, I think. But, you know, if you want to start learning other things like Houdini or whatever, Marvelous Designer, it all adds up, right? It can become overwhelming very quickly. Keep it simple. When you look at you look at job applications and companies are hiring artists, what are they asking for? Max Maya, Substance, maybe ZBrush is usually the case, right? And some of them now are asking for other things, perhaps like working with GeoNodes or something like that, or Houdini. So, but look at the job applications. Whatever they're saying to use, there's a good odd chance those are the kinds of things you need to start learning how to use, right? A lot of indie artists, when they're working on their projects, I'm going to give you kind of a little cheat sheet here, I guess, or a little recommendation. The go-to software for creating 3D models for games, right, is going to be your main program, Max Maya or Blender, Substance Painter, and Photoshop. That's your main three go-tos. Beyond that, everything else is a little bit more niche, right? Like Substance Designer is great, but you don't have to learn it right away. You can do a lot of work in Substance Painter alone, right? And then pick up Substance Designer a little bit later on, perhaps. You start learning these softwares kind of like one at a time. It doesn't, like, you don't need to run off and go buy like Rhizome UV right off the bat necessarily. You don't necessarily need to go buy like a Topo Gun or something like that, or Keyshot or whatever else might be out there that you're thinking of using. Different render pipelines, or like, you know, like we're using Cycles and Blender, but like Arnold and Maya Max. And then do you need to go pay for a different type of renderer and learn that when you're trying to create game assets? Not necessarily. If you really need it for specific visual things, like you're doing some kind of like sizzle reel or something, or teaser, or some kind of video you want to create for like a game convention or something, maybe you might use the other software like Premiere and After Effects and whatever else you can throw into that big list of stuff you want to utilize. But you get where I'm going with this. Use what you need to know to get the job done that you need done. Blender is going to be the core of it. Blender or Max or Maya, kind of the core of it. The poly modelers, you need to know how to learn to work with the topology, unwrap, rig, animate. Get them into the game engines themselves, because you're going to be responsible for, you know, in an indie setting, you're responsible for a lot of things, characters and all kinds of fun stuff, right? So get used to going into that mindset of working in the game engine and learning Unreal Engine. That's like my go-to recommendations is Blender, Substance Painter, Photoshop, Game Engine, whatever one you want to work in. Those are going to be your key things, right? Beyond that, everything else is kind of optional as an indie game artist, okay? So if you want to create assets and start up an asset store, or if you want to create your own indie projects, if you're just working with the modeling and the art side of it, you know, use the tools that you need to use, because there's more involved with indie projects, obviously. There's UI elements, you know, you might be using After Effects for a lot of stuff like that. Who knows? But the more you pile onto yourself as a beginner, the harder everything becomes, right? So just stick with Blender. Don't worry about everything underneath the sun. Blender, Photoshop, Substance Painter. I'm telling you right now. Only ones you need to know right off the bat. The rest can come later, okay? And so when people, they constantly tell me, like, why am I not using Plasticity? Because it's not required, okay? It's, especially when I'm teaching tutorials, it's like one of the worst things to try to teach everybody how to use all the different software that exists out there. There's no point, right? You got to use the ones that work and get the job done that you need done. And then that's it. All right. You don't have to take it any further than that if you really wanted to, but it could be useful later on in your career, perhaps, if you learn additional other things like creating animated user interface elements and things like that, right? But, or doing the VFX side of things, or the special effects and games and whatnot. So using like particle systems and simulations and all that fun stuff too. So, and setting up sprites and having them animate and decay and use different types of physics, and setting up voids and programming, possibly like tech art aspects and so on and so forth. And there's a lot that can go into all that, right? It takes years and years to develop fully, but honestly, you can do it rather fast if you really want to. You just got to hang out with the right people, kind of talk to them, get to know them, but actually work on projects too. Don't just, it's easy to get lost in 3D software where you're just kind of fumbling around, just doing little practice pieces that have no purpose. Work on things that have a purpose, and a big project pushing you in like a same, like unified single direction, especially with other people working on it with you, is much, much better. It's going to be, you're going to learn much faster on actual projects than you would by yourself. Okay. So, but you won't know these kind of things until you start, you know, having somebody tell you about it. You start working with other guys that work on things. Trust me, Photoshop, Blender, and Substance Painter is solid. Okay. You could spend a lot of time in other software when you don't need to. And, but eventually you get the CAD software. No problem. That's fine. Learn Fusion if you want, or Plasticity or whatever. But you don't have to do it right now. You can put it on the back burner and wait. For myself, I rather have the control over my models than the way CAD usually outputs things. But I get excited about programs like Plasticity, like Substance 3D Modeler. I like seeing where poly modeling could potentially end up if the tools were more R&D'd and developed, right? Because they've been kind of stagnant for almost like, I don't know, since like what, 2006. There hasn't been a whole ton of improvements with poly modelers, but there's been a few here and there, no doubt, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? For the last almost 20 years. So you get the idea. Like, anyways, I'll check you out in the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. See you then.